So Kay, can you do a little test for us and see if they can hear you now?
Can you hear me now, Sherry?
I can hear you, Kay. Can see you and hear you.
Okay.
Okay. Well, how about if we start over then?
You want me to start over again?
I do, because I want
That would
everybody
be good.
we're
I'll
recording
try to
this
say
too.
this again.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So Kay,
Yes.
I know that you went through a grieving process because you had several family members that died. And I wanted to know if you could tell us about what you experienced.
Okay, I'm going to talk about my mother right now. My dad and my grandmother both died within 1 month of each other, which left me and my mom alone for many years, and she's the only parent that I had. So I became her rock and was in total care with decisions for everything that she needed during that time. And my mother was a very vibrant person, very intelligent, the total opposite of me. She was a chatterbox and knew everybody. Anyway, she was on by Alzheimer's disease. And during that time, was her had made all this decision. And when it got to the point where she didn't know me, or even if she had a daughter or anything else, I changed the way I cared for her because I spent more time with her. I held her hand, I sang hymns with her. The stories she told me that were completely not right, but I didn't ever. And I told me that I should hear quickly that my mother was dying. Of course, I went. I really thought that she would, but that's not what happened at all. I stayed by her side, not leaving to eat or sleep away from her until God did take her home. And during this time, I was alone.
You're the only one that can hear her?
Pardon?
I just said, am I the only, well, I can hear now. For a minute, I couldn't hear anything. But I think I'm okay now.
So anyway, I called my family and my friends and funeral arrangements. In 3 days, everybody came and left me totally alone. So what I needed at the time was for people to help me fill the time I had spent caring for my mother, because that's empty time for me now. But I quickly realized that wasn't going to happen, and that I needed to reach out and build a better life for myself. Also needed friends to talk to me and ask questions to my mother. So
Questions?
okay.
There, so that's great, Kay. So you started out by saying, so was the grief process similar with each person's death, or was it different?
Each death is different, and for age at the time makes a difference in how you grieve and how long the process takes. Also, the relationship with that, there's a lot. When you're young, death is a shock. It hurts, still invincible, and we get right to our life. At middle age, we may have parents, friends, and children, and are more depends on the one who's passed. But if we're lucky enough to reach old age, death is common subject, and we all know our time is coming. So we accept losing those around and try to prepare for our departure. But grief does not always involve physical death. And in these age groups that have died. When I was in high school, I had a girlfriend, and we were seniors, and she had, at that time, you had to go to a sanitarium if you had tuberculosis, and she died there. So on our graduation night, we mourned her death and her passing. But since we just gotten out of school and everybody was going their different ways, we just, and before that hard. Lost to my first child by a miscarriage. And although there was no baby in sight, my grief was intense. No kind words of, there will be a next time. It was God. He may have been damaged. None of that helped me. Dream for years where I would go to bed at night and I would cry all night. And I would wake up the next morning totally drained. And a few years later, someone asked me if I'd had courage, and to know. And once I knew that, the dreams. Number 3, on my anniversary on September the 25th, my dad was diagnosed with aplastic. And he died 3 months later. He chose not to receive the platelets, knowing he couldn't live. My dad never went to church, but before he died, he asked me to I don't know if he accepted Jesus, and I could have made a difference in his life that night. And it was difficult to accept because he chose death over fighting with us. God called him home. The only grandparent I ever knew my mom, my grandma, and she died at the age of 95. Only one in my family who ever gave me any religious guidance. Knowing she had lived a long and happy life made it easier to go through the grieving process because she was a Christian, and that gave me peace. Number 5. At the age of 62, I divorced my husband of 45 years, and this was the worst pain I had ever been through. My life was shattered. I have let God down because I have vowed I would never do this. My children will suffer because of my mistake and my decision. Friends take sides, judgments are made, and I am a mess. I am the one who doesn't fit in anywhere. Friends don't understand when they talk about, we did this and we are going there, and this is like a raw spot for anybody that's divorced. So you adjust and learn to live the single, solitary life. But this person is still alive, and you were aware of that. I did need medication at that time for a while, and I went to counseling for over a year to get through this tough time. Then, 7 years later, he gets sick and dies, and now it's like losing him all over again. Only this time, he's your children's father. And he is really dead, and he is gone. The most hurtful comment I have ever received was a few weeks after he had died, and I was in a store. And this woman came up to me and in a very loud voice said, "Kay, did you know Neil died?" As if I did not care or had anything to do with this man. Which just goes to show how much words can hurt, and you don't even realize what you said.
Okay, what encouragement would you share with somebody who's going to?
Encouragement for others right now would be, many have gone through this before you, and you can do it too. We are all in the circle of life, and God has a plan for you. Follow him. 3, there is help out there for you if you need it. Reach out. 4, remember, you are never alone. And the other day, it's just not thoughts, but theirs. Grief, but it changes. Message, not a place to stay. Grief is not a sign of weakness, nor a lack of faith. It is the love.
Okay. Sherry and Dan, we're going to turn to you now. So you've been on the other side of this, and you've worked with this and bereavement from a professional perspective. So what advice do you have for caregivers when someone is working through grief?
Before I answer that, honey, I don't mean to step on your toes, but I missed a lot of what Kay said, but I got enough to know that she actually covered so much of what grief is all about. The age differences, the difference in losses from death, illness, divorce, on and on. I got enough to know that Kay really has said everything there is to say about this process. I missed so much because my computer just came up in front of me and said, your connection is questionable, is unstable, unfortunately.
So Sherry, what would you add to what Kay said?
I'm not sure at this point because she did cover so much other than grief is a process. There's no time limit. It's different for every person and every age. For children, it starts with children. I was touched recently. We all have friends who are originally from Robinson, whose parents just died close together. And I think you know who I'm referring to. Their daughter, the granddaughter, Annika, and her daughter, who must be 10 or 11, I'm not sure, were with their grandmother when she died, and it was the most beautiful sight I have seen in a long time. Many people question having children involved when a loved one dies. What they did with their children is spot on. I guess the only
Im-
thing I say, I don't know what else to say because Kay sought counseling. She did all the right things. Honey, can you help here? I don't know what else.
Well, I have to preface, is everyone able to hear me?
Yes.
I have to preface by saying I wear hearing aids in both ears. I ran around and I got a set so I could listen. And I'm sorry, Kay, I interrupted you in a very serious point, but I did not get 1 or 2% of what Kay had to say. So I can't respond to what Kay did. I just know her pretty well from her poems, know her pretty well from church, and I know that she was speaking from a deep place in her soul. So that is typical, and I can only imagine what you're saying. Grief. A lot has been said. Sherry and I do look at it a different side. There's a lot we could go into. For instance, we have suffered in our lives a lot of losses, including 6 miscarriages and 1 full-time stillborn. We took care of all 4 of our parents until their deaths. We were caregivers for them. We were with my mother when she took her last breath. All of that I feel blessed to have experienced. I don't know what it did to me. I know part of what it did to me because back when we were living in Maine, it made me want to do something. And so I started volunteering at Kennebec Valley Hospice for children. And I'm going to answer one of the questions that Pastor Jay sent me just to get it over with, because I don't think we have a lot to discuss it. But I was asked,
What happened? Oh, you're gone.
He'll be back. Don't
We'll
worry.
be back.
I don't think I like this method.
can you tell us a little bit about your loss? And I knew something about it, but not the whole detail. I wasn't ready for what he had to say. I'm not sure if I'm going to make through it today. But he said he was home with his mom and his brothers and sisters and his mom's boyfriend. Mom and dad were divorced. Suddenly, dad, biological dad, came into the house and said to all of them, go to the living room, I will be right back. They did. He went upstairs. He came down the stairs and stopped about halfway, put a revolver barrel in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Now, there's another side of grief there, obviously. How did I respond to it? Almost like I am right now, with tears running down my face. The 10-year-old, offered no emotional response to it whatsoever, and I was always surprised by that. But when he was finished, I stood up and walked over to him. He stood up, I gave him a big hug, and I waited until I could feel his body relax. When that happened, I knew that he and I had bonded. And we talked more about it in the weeks to come, but that was the most traumatic grief experience that I've had. It taught me a lot about grief because it like Sherry said and Kay said, it's so different. Whether it's a loss of a loved one or a parent, or again, in my case, my father was a victim of Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever you want to call it. And I didn't know, I was having a lot of trouble handling it. Every time my dad said his age wrong, I would correct him and I'd do all these things. And I just didn't want to let him go. That's my grieving process for my dad. I didn't want to let him go, but I went to a grief support group. And one of the first things they said is, why does it matter what age he is? I'm getting away from grief a little bit, but it still is part of it because I was losing him. He was losing me. We were both still alive, but the loss was still very, very real. When he died, I was very happy, which brings me something else. I'm jumping around, but brings me something else. Things not to say. A lot of people, out of the goodness of their heart and their souls, will come to you after a loss, any kind of a loss, and say, it was probably for the best. I totally disagree. That's for them to say, but not for you to say. All I could ever tell people is you're going to feel, when someone has a loss, you're going to feel a strong desire to say something to them. If you have to, hug them and say you're sorry. But you're not obliged to talk to them. Hold them. Hold their hands. Offer your ears, not your words, but your ears. Let them talk to you in the weeks to come over and over. They probably won't want to talk to their families too much because they start to feel like a burden. They feel like they don't want to hear the story anymore. So why should I burden them with my story over and over and over again? Well, you can be that person that can listen to them and hold their hand and give them a hug and say, you can only imagine, because you can't understand, you can't walk in their shoes, but you can only imagine what it's like. We've lost our 4 parents. Sherry's stepfather, her mother, my mother, and my father, all of them totally different. My mother basically took her life because she decided she didn't want to live anymore. That's a whole different side of suicide and grieving. We've all been through grieving with this pandemic. We've lost control of our lives. And when we don't have control, it's a loss, whether it's a divorce or a job or a friendship or whatever. They're losses. And don't let anyone say, but that it's not grief. A lot of people think very narrowly, and they say grief is only when someone dies. So wrong. So wrong. Grief is loss. I'm going to jump again. In the documents that were sent by Pastor Jay and Janelle, I saw the word grief counselors. Sherry and I have decided long ago not to relate to ourselves as counselors, but as companions, or all of a sudden the other word, I lose it, honey, what is it?
Facilitators.
Facilitators, because we choose to walk with the person, not to guide them. We're not there to tell them answers to their stories. It's like if any of you have ever been through therapy, you wonder what your therapist is getting paid for because they don't offer too much. And no, they don't, because what they're trying to do is get you to say things and come to your own realization. People will go through the grief process whether they want to or not. Little sideline. When my mother died, she and I were not on the best of terms. I loved her dearly and I hated her dearly. I did not grieve her death. It's been like 12, 14 years. I'm just recently starting to grieve. I'm just starting to feel happy. When some of her memories come back into my mind. Before, they just brought anger. And that's natural. People are going to be angry. Anyway, let me stop and see if anyone else wants to jump in here because I'll talk for forever.
You will. I would like to go back to Kay. Kay, even though I missed a lot of your story, I found myself wondering if you're finding it cathartic to tell it again I'm sure this isn't the first time you've told your story. I would think it is cathartic.
It is. Since I had this assignment, it's caused me to sit and think about these things that I've lived through, because I said when I became a Stephen minister, all these people are educated and teachers and all this, and I'm not. So the only thing I have to draw on that helps me is my experience in life. So,
which is huge, which is huge. Don't underestimate that, please. I hope also what I wanted to say that I hope I didn't interrupt you. It's hard for me to do this Zoom thing, but I hope when you are experiencing all of the different grief losses that you did, that you had somebody that you could talk with, someone who would just listen to you.
that's one thing that I hadn't addressed yet, but I will tell you what I said about that.
You did or you did not? Because it's so important. It's so important to have someone to talk with.
What I needed.
Lost you.
Never wanted to share my feelings, so I internalized everything. So lots of conversations with myself and all my thoughts were running through my mind. I had no one that I opened up to, and that's my own fault, and I know that. But what I needed was for someone to care enough to really listen.
Yes.
What I had to say.
That's right.
I really wanted to share. And I saw one because I didn't have. Another thing I needed was to be included in activities and to keep me busy. And so I used my poetry and my love of sewing to fill my empty time and to get through my tough days. During this time, God revealed to me that I had the gift of healing touch. And through I can be a service in need.
Yes.
Were the things I needed.
Yes.
Kay, have you ever thought of sequentially putting your journey in poem form?
No, but I have a poem I wrote for when Sherry was here that I thought I'd read. She asked me to write a poem for her journal years ago, and this is one. The one is hard to bear. Out of sight, but not my mind. Memories of you, I'll always. An empty place in my heart has to be filled, and I must start with loving thoughts and sunny days, remembering all your special ways. You wouldn't want me to stay sad, caught in a hole and feel so bad. I'll celebrate your life and smile and share your good deeds all the while. I'll cry for you, but not so long that I am trapped without a song. Time heals nothing. It's up to me to live life as it's meant to be. God gives me strength to face each day, to lift my heart to Him and pray that you are safe in His tender care. And someday soon, I'll see you there.
I remember. That's so beautiful. So beautiful.
What do you remember what motivated you at that moment to start that poem?
He asked me to write something, and that's what I came up with.
I couldn't hear it very well.
I asked her to write something.
Yeah. She asked for.
I'm sorry, I'm still struggling. I have both hearing aids turned up to maximum volume.
It's the Zoom.
I'm only happy when I'm talking, I guess.
No.
It's okay, Dan. She said that Sharon asked her to write a poem.
I asked, can you hear me, honey? Can you?
Yes,
I had asked Kay if she would write a poem, write something
when
she-
did you ask that?
years ago. Years
When-
ago.
when It was in
I still
a
have it.
council here and yeah, together. So, yeah.
And I remember thinking, I loved writing, but I never could write poetry. And I remember thinking, how beautiful, what a gift you have. And you do.
Thank you.
Mhm. You remind me, Maya Angelou had a saying, and it just, reminded me of it. In the words of Maya Angelou, try to be the rainbow in someone else's cloud. That's what you've always been, Kay. You've always been the rainbow in someone else's cloud. And I miss you. Anyway, now I'll cry.
Yeah,
Does grief ever end?
no,
No,
changes.
Good
It
answer.
never goes away. The pain
It never
lessens.
goes away. It gets easier to handle. And then just when you think you have got a handle on it, something triggers. Usually when you're in some place where you don't want to let it trigger, you're at the grocery store or Walmart, and all of a sudden something happens and you stand there with tears in your eyes and you go, and you know what? That's all right. And if people criticize, then it's their problem.
Which reminds me of things that I think Pastor Jay had, one of the questions he asked us to think about was, what are some of the things that people might say that are hurtful to a grieving person? And the things that I remembered hearing in my support groups were, he's in a better place now. Now we know that may be true. However, to the person who is grieving, the better place would be with him or her. So it's not something that is readily welcomed. Look at what you have to be thankful for. Whoa. I know what I have to be thankful for. I don't need to be reminded now when I'm grieving the loss of someone I loved. This is behind you now. Time to move on. And there are some others, but
How you feel, I think, is the bigger one.
how do you
You
I
just
know.
reminded me of something that I wanted to add
wait?
regarding miscarriages.
Mhm.
For anyone, well, I don't know whether people have been through or not, but so many people discount miscarriages. Maybe someone was pregnant for 2 months or something like that, and they just say, well, a miscarriage is a loss. Whether you ever got to see the baby or whatever, it is a loss. And that person is going to go through hidden grief. Because open grief for miscarriages is generally not accepted by a lot of people, because most people feel like I just said, oh yeah, everyone has them, you're going to get over it. Next time, better luck next time, and all that. And it's like, those are like jabs in the heart. Those hurt so much. Usually they're not intended, but they do hurt. And so again, hold their hands, listen. You don't even have to react. If they want you to talk, they'll ask you to talk probably. Be with them, walk with them.
Stephen Ministers, this is a good time to remind you that we have that resource library bookshelf in the library. We have a book called What Was Lost, which is around miscarriage. but we also have several other grief resources that are available there to help you beyond everything that we've already done in our training. Because we talked about the 5 stages of grief a long time ago, if you'll remember that. And Dan very well described for us his own being stuck in that anger phase with his mother. And that it has taken him a while to continue to move through those phases. An example for us, that grief is different for every person in every situation. So I think you've provided us with some really great examples and things to think about. Does anybody have questions for Kay or Sherry or Dan? Becky, we're glad you were able to join us tonight, by the way. We see that you're on the Zoom call with us as well.
I'd like to make a last comment from me, because I can't speak for my wife, but just because we are 2,000 miles away doesn't mean that if someone that's there needs someone, a third party, so to speak, to listen to. Don't hesitate to see Pastor Jay. And Jay, you have my permission to give them my email address, my phone number, whatever. I'm already doing this with a couple of people. One Robinson and one not Robinson, and just dealing with their grief on not a regular basis, but kind of being watchful. And they're forever grateful. And I'm have to admit that it makes me feel great to help them.
I have a short story I'd like to share if there's enough time. Pastor Jay, is there time?
Yes.
It didn't sound like Pastor Jay. That's okay. I was just, I don't know what made me think of this, but I was just reminded of a different type of grief personally. When we left Robinson, 15 years ago? Has it been
2007?
What? Whatever.
2007.
Yes, yes. And we moved into our house on North Cross, and we're all settled, and I loved it. Dan had found that house for us in my absence because I was still back in Maine selling our house and doing all kinds of things.
Hold on just for a minute. You're talking about 1999.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We retired in 2007, but
right.
back when we first got to LTC.
Right. So,
okay,
but we're sitting in our living room, and we had our dear friends Doug and Yvonne Newland for dinner. And we're talking about just odds and ends of things and whatever. And all of a sudden, the tears came. And I thought, what is this? The grief person didn't know what was happening. I all of a sudden realized that I was grieving the loss of our former home and state and friends. And even as much as I loved where we were, and I loved that living room, and I loved that front porch, and I was beginning to love Robinson, I was grieving the move, and I hadn't recognized it until that moment that night. Do you remember that, honey? Dan? Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Hello.
And also grieving the loss. What's that? I missed that. You were also grieving the loss of who you were before and what you were at that moment, because you basically didn't feel like you were anyone anymore.
That's right. I was searching and trying to figure out what I was going to do in the next phase, because I loved my work. I loved everything about it. And that was a huge loss. So, but for me, it just struck me so strangely. And I still chuckle because I did not recognize, the grief person did not recognize the grief. That's all.
And I think it was interesting that Robinson is what brought you out of that, because
yes,
I needed fundraising and and ticket
And I
sales
helped,
to
right.
happen. And I asked you to go out into the community and meet all of these unknown people.
Right.
And she did, and made a lot of people that we stayed with for 9 years as acquaintances. And some of them became really good friends. That gave you your new meaning of life, so to speak, so that it was helping with the grief of the loss of the loss. Excuse me.
Now,
I remember.
what's going to happen tonight, because it's a new kind of grief for both of us, because I'm missing you all very, very much, and I'm in tears. So I'm not so sure that this Zoom meeting was so great. No, such a good idea. No, it's been great seeing you all, and we're just honored to have been asked to be part of this, even though I'm not sure what we've shared, but we really enjoyed your sharing, Kay. And thank you for asking us, Pastor Jay. And that's all I have to say.
Great.
I do.
And
No,
we have
the
enjoyed
truth.
having you. It has not been sad for us. It's been a joy to be able to see your faces again and to be reminded of happy memories of times that we have shared together over the years. Even you and I have those over the course of my time. We're grateful for you joining us. Kay, we're grateful for you sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. God bless you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye for now.